Welcome to this lecture. Over the next few minutes, we will explore the principle of transparency in commercial communication, specifically within the agri-food sector. Historically, the relationship between food producers and consumers was plagued by information asymmetry. The producer knew everything about the product, and the consumer knew very little. Today, transparency is not just an ethical choice, it is a strict legal requirement. We will examine how the principle is applied, particularly in the European Union, which boasts some of the most rigorous food information laws in the world, and look at how transparency translates into labeling and marketing practices. What do we mean by transparency in this context? It means providing clear, accurate, and easily accessible information about what a product is, where it comes from, and how it was made. Because modern global supply chains are incredibly complex, consumers are physically and psychologically disconnected from the farm that produced their food. This disconnection breeds a trust deficit. Transparency is the bridge. Its ultimate goal is to empower consumers. When a consumer walks down a supermarket aisle, they aren't just making an economic choice, they are making a health, ethical, and environmental choice. Transparency ensures those choices are informed. The European Union takes a highly proactive approach to food transparency. EU citizens have historically high expectations regarding food safety, driven by base crises like the BCE, the mad cow outbreak in the 1990s. This led to a foundational rule, traceability. Every food business in the EU must be able to trace its ingredient, one step back to the supplier, one step forward to the buyer. Currently, this is heavily guided by the farm-to-fork strategy, a pillar of the European Green Deal. The EU believes that without transparent commercial communication, a transition to sustainable food systems is impossible. The core philosophy here is simple. Knowing what is in your food is a fundamental consumer right. If you remember, one piece of legislation from this lecture, it must be the FIC Regulation EU number 1169/2011 on food information to consumers. This is a cornerstone of EU transparency in food. Article 7 is critical. It explicitly states that food information must not be misleading. A producer cannot suggest a food possesses special characteristics when all similar foods possess those same characteristics. They cannot lie about the origin, the quantity, and how it was made. Furthermore, it's not enough for the information to merely exist. The regulation mandates clarity. If the information isn't microscopically in a text or uses confusing scientific jargon to mask simple ingredients, it violates the principle of transparency. The label is where the principle of transparency is put into daily practice. Under FIC regulation, certain practices are mandatory to ensure the consumer isn't left guessing. Ingredients must be listed by weight. Most importantly, the 14 major allergens must be visually highlighted, usually bolded or written in capital letters, within the ingredient list. This is a matter of life and death, making transparency a safety issue. We also see mandatory nutritional declaration and increasingly strict rules on the country of origin. For instance, if you sell a jar of tomato sauce with an Italian flag on it, but the tomatoes come from outside the EU, you must clearly state the origin of the primary ingredient to avoid misleading the buyer. The EU even legislated font size to kill the deceptive fine print tactics. Transparency isn't just about what you must say. It's heavily defined by what you cannot say. commercial communication is governed by the Unfair Commercial Practice Directive, which bans deceitful marketing. More specific to food is the Nutrition and Claims Regulation. In the EU, a food producer cannot claim their product cures or treats a disease that is reserved for medicine. If a producer wants to make a health claim like calcium is needed to the maintenance of normal bones, that claim must be scientifically vetted and pre-authorized by the European Food Safety Authority. Furthermore, the EU is cracking down on the greenwashing. Throwing a green leaf on a package and calling it eco-friendly without rigorous, transparent data to back it up is increasingly considered a banned deceptive practice. Now, why does EU legislation matter if you are outside Europe? Because of the phenomenon known as Brussels effect. The EU is one of the largest consumer markets in the world. Multinational food companies often find it easier to adapt the entire global production to meet strict EU standards rather than creating different labels for different regions. Therefore, European principle of transparency, requiring scientific validation for claims, strictly defined terms like organic, and prioritizing the consumer right to know, serve as a blueprint for the rest of the world. Looking forward, we are seeing physical labels being augmented by digital transparency, such as a QR code linked to blockchain data, allowing consumers to trace a product back to the exact field it was grown in. To conclude, transparency in commercial communication is the fundamental tool we use to balance the power dynamic between massive food producers and the individual consumers. Through legislation like the FIC regulation, the EU ensures that transparency is a baseline reality, not a marketing gimmick. Banning misleading claims and mandating clear labeling protects health and empowering choices. Ultimately, producers who embrace these, who see transparency not as a legal burden but as a competitive advantage, are the ones who will secure the lasting trust of the modern consumer. Thank you.